This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Well, financial markets are finally stabilizing after a pretty stormy week. Investors are now looking to policymakers for some signs of monetary and fiscal stimulus, with a lot depending on the US Fed's stance in those minutes which we expect this week. That's why we saw MSCI's index of emerging market stocks rising for a fourth day today. South Africa's JSE also up, with banks gaining almost 2% in trading today. Financials also up about 1.27%. In Nigeria, FMCGs like Dangote Sugar and Nestle topping the gainers list, with, of course, Ecobank's ETI and MTN also boosting market performance today. Now, also coming up on the show, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari unveiled his new cabinet. Facebook to block apps that collect user data, and how pastoralists in northern Kenya are staying ahead of changing weather patterns. Well, let's start off the show in Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari swore members of his new cabinet into office on Wednesday. Now, Buhari kept the petroleum portfolio for himself, just like in his first term in the cabinet of 43 ministers. Timi Pre Silva was appointed Minister of State for Petroleum to manage the portfolio on a day-to-day basis. Of course, Silva replaces Emmanuel Kachiku, who was the country's representative at OPEC meetings. Zainab Ahmed retained the position of Finance Minister. Well, let's explore Buhari's new cabinet further. We're joined by Kunle Amida. He's a director at Deals Advisory at PwC in Nigeria. Great to have you on the show, sir. Now, looking at this new cabinet, the vast majority served in Buhari's previous cabinet. What changes, if any, do you feel Buhari made to this new cabinet this time around?
Thanks a lot. I think for the new cabinet, about 13 of the ministers from the previous, the last 4 years, they were returned by the president. The key changes the president made, I think, the first one is the combination of the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning, and also the Ministry of Power is now a separate department. And I think one notable change is also the fact that the replacement of the Minister of Trade and Investment. If we start with the Finance Ministry, that combination is very important because previously we've had the Ministry of Budget and National Planning as a separate ministry. And the implication, what we expect now, is that it will be easy and possible for the ministry, the combined ministry, to be more efficient, to address the issues that we have as a nation. The other important thing, a major issue in Nigeria is electricity access. These are a lot, and now that the Power Ministry is a separate ministry, we believe that with the right team and efficiency and effectiveness of execution, it will be very possible for us to make significant progress. Just very recently, I think yesterday and today, we know that it's been announced that about 600 billion naira will be available for power sector, for the entire industry, to address all the electricity, the shortfall, tariff shortfall that we've had to deal with. And also, there's an announcement in the news now. We don't know, the details are still, we're still dealing with, at least assessing the details, that
right.
We will be having a cost-reflective tariff in the electricity sector very soon.
Right. Well,
so
Mr.
we expect those changes that he made, they are quite significant. Also, the Minister of Trade, I can hear you?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. We'll get into that a little bit more later on. But let's talk a little bit about the petroleum minister. Now, of course, former governor of Bayelsa State, Timipre Silva, he replaced Ibe Kachiko as Minister of State for Petroleum. What do we know about Silva so far? How do stakeholders, especially in the oil sector, feel about his experience in the role?
He's a politician, obviously, a former governor of Bayelsa State, like you said. As we have it now, the state itself produces about 500,000 barrels of crude per day, which currently is about over 22–23% of the entire production of Nigeria. And why is that important? It is important because in 2016, when we had issues with oil prices, a major factor that affected us that at least pulled the country into recession was the militancy that we experienced. So with appointing someone from a state that make at least a significant contribution, and being a former governor, oil prices currently is about $56. It's putting pressure on the foreign exchange proceeds of the country. With him, what we can expect is that this administration will be able to manage the production levels. So if we are able to increase or at least stabilize production, the foreign exchange proceeds of the country will be able at least to position us for the next 4 years and the headwinds that we expect. So with him in charge, it is expected that he will be able to manage the Niger Delta area. He will be able to interact better with the communities, and hopefully we will see the impact, at least in Nigeria, experiencing stable production, even if oil prices remain low.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but many thanks for joining us on the show, Mr. Amida. Of course, that was Kunle Amida. He's a director at Deals Advisory at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Nigeria. Well, staying in the country, Nigeria's government says it is struggling to collect more taxes in order to shore up its revenue and develop its economy. Now, according to data reports from the country's tax agency, about $40 billion was collected during the period 2012 to 2014, while less than $35 billion have been remitted so far within the 2015 to 2018 period. Here's CGTN's Phili Haza telling us more on that story.
VADE, Voluntary Assets and Income Declaration Scheme, was launched by the Nigerian government in July 2017 to encourage tax compliance in the country. The initiative gives corporate organizations and individuals who should be paying tax but are not a chance to come forward, declare their income or assets, and pay their taxes over a period of time. Nigeria's leading tax agency says this has led to a significant progress in the country's tax system.
From 10 million individuals, it went up to 14 million within 12 months, a growth of 40%. And with VADES, we honestly believe that from that 14 million in terms of individuals, we should hit close to 35 million individuals who have not made any payment of tax.
However, according to the latest data by PricewaterhouseCoopers, Nigeria still has a low tax to GDP ratio of 6% as against the government's target of 15% by 2020. Also, the presidency has expressed concern that the country's effort so far has not surpassed previous remittances in the years 2012 to 2014. But the country's tax agency says the reason for the low remittances is mainly due to a fall in crude oil prices from over $100 per barrel before the current administration in 2015 to around half the price by 2017. Tax analyst Andrew Echono says this explains the move by the government to expand its tax base on non-oil remittances from 42% previously in 2014 to 51% by 2018.
There was this drop in oil, which affected businesses generally. And so Nigerians picked up themselves and focused on other areas, especially at this point where the oil is still dwindling, the oil price is still dwindling. And so other sectors like agriculture and some other retail sectors picked up. And so what the FIRS did was to try and capture as much companies as possible into the tax net.
Analysts also say it's important for the government to ensure it provides adequate infrastructure and basic amenities to encourage more people pay their taxes.
So unless we have collective infrastructure where everybody benefits at the same time, irrespective of where you belong, but as far as you pay your taxes, then a lot more people will be willing to pay tax to the center so that they can enjoy the common good and the common infrastructure.
Nigeria now generates over $14 billion annually in taxes, which is half the country's budget of about $24 billion.
Experts say the government may need to continue its efforts of sensitizing more of its populace on the need to pay their tax while ensuring the revenue generated is put to good use. This, they say, will help the current administration's mandate of providing a better livelihood for its citizens. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Well, let's move on to South Sudan now. The government says it has discovered more crude oil in the northern part of the country, close to the Adar oil fields. Now, it is planning to begin production by the end of the year there. The administration in Juba says the discovery will help boost oil production in the country. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet reporting.
South Sudan's petroleum minister says a consortium led by China's National Petroleum Corporation made the oil discovery. The new oil well is located near the border with Ethiopia and Sudan in the country's northeastern Upper Nile state. The petroleum minister says the field has more than 300 million barrels of recoverable oil. The petroleum minister says his ministry is encouraging more oil exploration across the country and expects there to be further discoveries made. Beijing dominates South Sudan's oil industry, with China's National Petroleum Corporation running the country's Dar Petroleum Operating Company, Greater Petroleum Operating Company, Consortia, and Sinopec. Other players in South Sudan's oil sector, though, include Petronas of Malaysia, Nile Pet from South Sudan, and the Egypt's Tri-Ocean Energy. South Sudan is currently producing about 180,000 barrels per day. That's down from 350,000 barrels per day in 2011, but an increase on 2014 levels of 130,000 barrels a day. The decline in production was largely as a result of civil war, which broke out in 2013. The country now says it's working to boost production back to pre-war levels by the end of 2020. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And meanwhile, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Egypt will meet on Thursday in Cairo, and they'll be, of course, deciding on interest rates for the next period. Here's Yasser Hakim looking at the possible outcomes.
The central bank has fixed interest rates at over 15% for the past 4 sessions to encourage foreign investments in its high-yield bonds. Egyptians have also benefited by issuing certificates with attractive returns to sustain the inflationary effects of economic reforms. But many experts believe this will change in the upcoming session.
These circumstances are feasible for easing in rates, especially after the U.S. have reduced its interest rates, in addition to the fall in inflation numbers in Egypt. The improving forex and stability in international oil prices could also encourage the bank to move rates down.
Cutting rates this week could encourage businesses to begin borrowing for production and investment purposes. Industries have been unable to expand because of the high interests on loans.
However, there are experts who believe that it's a bit too early to reduce interest rates. The central bank should wait until it can ride out the effects of the latest energy price hikes.
The July scrap of electricity and fuel subsidies, as well as the volatility in emerging markets, might be a cause for caution.
Rates could remain as it is because its monetary policy, the bank is seeking to balance between the inflation rate and sustainable development. It also wants to benefit from the improving growth rates in foreign exchange market. Keeping things stable for a couple of months more looks like the safest option.
Experts are divided over the fate of interest rates this week. However, there seems to be a consensus that the CBE should drop rates by next session in September. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And now now look at our corporate headlines for the day. Zambian President Edgar Lungu will not be meeting mining company Vedanta Resources officials on his visit to India this week. This, of course, disputes an earlier report from the company of a planned meeting scheduled to discuss the liquidation of the firm's Konkola copper mines assets in Zambia. Meanwhile, Estonia's ride-sharing service, Bolt, has launched a food delivery service in the nation's capital of Tallinn. The company plans to roll out a Bolt food service in several countries, including South Africa, Latvia and Lithuania. Now, Bolt aims to grab market share with lower prices for consumers and a better cut for delivery personnel while building on its wider user base. An American retail giant, Walmart, is suing Tesla, claiming the electric car maker's solar panels are responsible for fires in 7 of its stores. The fires destroyed store merchandise and require substantial repairs, estimated at hundreds of thousands of dollars. And China's e-commerce giant Alibaba has delayed its $15 billion listing in Hong Kong. That's amid protests there. According to the decision of the firm's board, the listing was set to take place in August. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Facebook to block apps that collect users' data. And the Southern African Development Community supports calls to have Western sanctions against Zimbabwe lifted.
The economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, social networking firm Facebook is launching a tool that will limit the information stored on users by apps and websites. Now, the firm will introduce a section in a bid to improve handling of user data and boost privacy policies. The section will offer the option to turn off tracking, which could mean fewer ads that seem familiar. The move won't stop the gathering of data by the firm. Of course, Facebook recently incurred a $5 billion fine from the United States Federal Trade Commission for allegedly mishandling users' data. The control feature is expected to be launched in South Korea, Ireland, and Spain, which is consistent with the company's tendency to introduce changes in small markets first.
Facebook started rolling out a feature that will let you limit how much it tracks your activities outside of Facebook on other apps and websites for the purposes of targeting ads or newsfeed stories to you. You'll see the same number of ads, they just won't be targeted to you. Facebook says that it'll also make your newsfeed possibly less personalized because it won't be tracking, for example, what news sites you go to. To turn it on, you'll have to go to your settings and find a section called Off Facebook Activity. It will take several steps and lots of reading to actually get to this setting, so it's possible that a lot of people are not going to turn it on because it's too much work. Facebook makes nearly all of its money from advertising. It was $56 billion last year. So they've acknowledged that this could cut into their revenue, but they didn't say by how much. That will depend on how many people actually decide to use this tool.
Meanwhile, the Southern African Development Community says it supports a recently launched campaign for the removal of Western sanctions on Zimbabwe. Now, the move is seen as a huge step for global reintegration of the troubled country. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with more.
During a summit in Tanzania, the 15-member bloc agreed to step up its lobby and set aside a day in October to call for the lifting of embargoes that have stifled Zimbabwe's economy by cutting off international credit, discouraging foreign investment, and adversely impacting government's ability to deliver social services.
These are Africans obviously telling you very clearly that sanctions don't work. It's not the best way to deal with international issues. This is SADC telling you that sanctions are counterproductive and obviously destroy the economic and social fabric of nations. This is SADC maybe telling you that if you squeeze a country and push it to the corner, you will find that there will be misallocation of resources. In other words, a lot of resources may have to be diverted to defending the country.
Since a change in leadership in November 2017, Zimbabwe has been on a charm offensive, trying to mend relations with the United States and the European Union.
It's held an interministerial dialogue with the latter, but seems to be making slow progress with the US, which recently slapped sanctions on the army general who commanded a military response to post-election riots on August 1st last year.
But the groundswell of regional solidarity is seen as a game changer that could yield the much-desired breakthrough.
Any relationship at the economic and political level has to recognize that what Zimbabwe is giving out right now, which is a hand of cooperation, a hand of working together, is exactly the reciprocation that we want from the countries that naturally have imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. It's a process that will take time, but I am very convinced that where we are right now, we are moving closer and closer to a situation where the Africans are accepted for who they are, very important players in the global system.
The SADC member states also agreed to escalate the anti-sanctions lobby to the African Union, where they'll ask the chairperson to table the issue at the United Nations. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, Africa's largest retailer, ShopRite, says that hyperinflation, weak economies, and constrained consumers on the continent continues to impact its bottom line. The ShopRite Group posted a 19.6% decline in headline earnings for the year to June. Now, the full year results were slightly worse than expected, but the group is showing signs of a turnaround. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more.
It was a rough year for ShopRite. The implementation of new technology caused chaos. Then workers at its distribution center went on strike, affecting store supplies. Crime, too, cost the business. Headline earnings fell almost 20% and trading profit declined 14%. But the group addressed the challenges and saw a turnaround in South Africa.
It took much longer after such a massive impact on your supply chain to get your stock levels correct. The moment we got that right in the RSA environment, we really saw the results.
South African sales grew 9.4% in the last 6 months, a sharp contrast to the prior 6 months.
We're gaining market share, we're growing sales, we're growing volume, we're growing customers. So a very, very pleasing result the second 6 months for RSA. Unfortunately, not enough to offset all of the negative of the first 6 months, plus a further deterioration in the non-RSA operations in the second half.
Despite the weak economy here at home, the South African operations did slightly better than last year. The ShopRite Group, though, is struggling with its operations outside of South Africa. The African operations reported a trading loss of almost $18 million.
Angola is still suffering hyperinflation. There's 32 stores in the southern African country. A few years ago, Angola contributed a large chunk to ShopRite's profit.
But what we cannot fight against and what I can't keep them responsible for is currency fluctuations, availability of currency, hard currency. If we take Zambia, for example, they had a double-digit turnover growth, sales growth, and then they had a 12%, almost 12% devaluation in currency. And we recording in a rand-denominated currency that wipes out everything. And certain of your costs, and that's just how Africa operates, are dollar-linked, and therefore some of the costs are just not able to be contained within those exchange differences.
The group remains bullish on Africa. It opened 28 new stores across the 14 countries it operates in outside of South Africa, and it has plans for 29 new stores on the continent in 2020. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, South Africa's drive to improve its tech skills in the poorest parts of the country has received a boost. President Cyril Ramaphosa is committing to a skills revolution in order to prepare the country for the digital economy. While state-owned telecoms firm Broadband Infraco has partnered with tech giant Google to train thousands of young people in rural areas. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with their story.
Tech skills are scarce in South Africa's rural areas. Broadband Infraco has been leading government's SA Connect project to bring rural communities online, but more needs to be done.
What we realized when we were connecting the schools as well as the health facilities was that you leave the technology. Infrastructure is there, but people are not able to use the technology because firstly, there's no change management that takes place. Also, they have not been taught how to apply the technology.
The state-backed telecommunications company has partnered with tech giant Google to fill the skills gap by training 200,000 young people in outlying areas.
It's to prepare them for the job market, but it's also to give them exposure to what a child in Sentin has in as far as his education is concerned. So if you go to the rural environment, you'll find that very few of them actually have access to labs. So the power of this is to give them access to real visual kind of skills where they can see the experiments, they can get access to, tangible digital skills.
Close to 7 million people are unemployed in South Africa. More than half are young people who lack skills or experience. Google is investing millions of dollars to train young Africans so they're not left behind in the fourth industrial revolution.
So the partnership with Broadband Infraco is part of the larger Digital Skills for Africa program, where we have pledged, as we've said earlier, to train 10 million young Africans in all manner of digital skills. We want to take these skills to the rural areas, to underserved communities, to children from previously disadvantaged communities.
Young people in rural areas do not have access to the same resources as those living in cities. This initiative helps prepare youngsters for new generation jobs and businesses, which includes them in the economy, even if they're working remotely. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson meets Germany's Angela Merkel over Brexit. And And we look at some of the latest technologies at the World Robot Conference in Beijing.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And just about 5:30, let's recap today's top headlines. The presidents of Rwanda and Uganda have agreed to mend political fences after deepening tensions that culminated in block trade between the East African neighbors. Now, President Paul Kagame and his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni signed a memorandum of understanding on regional cooperation and security. The agreement was signed at a regional summit held in Luanda, Angola. Now, the Intergovernmental Authority for Development now wants Sudanese President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar to have a face-to-face meeting. This follows a meeting held in Addis Ababa over the implementation of a peace deal. And migrants from Spanish charity ship Open Arms have finally disembarked in the Italian island of Lampedusa after nearly 3 weeks at sea. Now, the move follows an order by an Italian prosecutor for the seizure of the ship and the evacuation of the migrants on board. The Open Arms ship, run by a Spanish charity, had been stranded at sea for the past 19 days. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, on the international front, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is in Germany to tell Chancellor Angela Merkel that unless she agrees to change the terms of its EU departure, Britain will leave on October 31st without a deal. Now, Johnson was received with military honors on his first trip overseas as a Prime Minister. More than 3 years after the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU, it is still unclear on what terms or indeed whether the bloc's second largest economy will leave the club it joined in 1973. Johnson, a Brexiteer who won the premiership a month ago, is betting that the threat of no-deal Brexit turmoil will convince Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron that the EU should do a last-minute divorce deal to suit his demands. Meanwhile, Britain's prelude to US President Donald Trump risks complicating the search for common ground this weekend at the G7 summit. The event is likely to be overshadowed by a transatlantic rift over trade, Iran and climate change as the leaders officially focus on reducing inequality. Now, it's still not clear if Trump will adopt a conciliatory direction at the summit. Summit host President Emmanuel Macron says he is avoiding a repeat of the fiasco in 2018 when Trump caused a stir by leaving the meeting early. Well, several countries are set to be represented at the summit, including the United States, France, Britain, Japan, Germany, Italy, and Canada.
A combination of two personalities who are not well known for their self-control is indeed going to be an unprecedented occasion. They will probably get along like a house on fire, or they will pretend to. Whether this will be simply a sideshow which will create some distraction and possibly even amusement is one thing. But if it actually gets into the way of the more substantive proceedings, that would be another story. But it is, these two together are a political nitroglycerin.
Meanwhile, China, South Korea and Japan have pledged to improve regional and global security as well as world economies like their own. Now, this comes as several new agreements are reached on how the trio will strengthen trilateral cooperation and assist other countries. Foreign ministers from the three held a meeting on Wednesday morning in Beijing's Gubei water town. CGTN reporter Wang Hui has the story.
This 9th trilateral foreign ministers meeting between China, South Korea and Japan comes as the trio marks 20 years of three-way cooperation. They agree on the vision of the three nations' cooperation over the next 10 years and a conceptual document on coordination for the three countries plus X, which pledges to assist other nations. They also agreed to finish negotiations of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, this year and speed up the three nations' free trade zone talks. The ministers also voiced their support for multilateralism and free trade.
Facing the global economy's downward risks, the three countries should strengthen communication and coordination of our macroeconomic policies, safeguard free trade, and forge an open economy.
As an important foundation of the region's prosperity, we should insist on creating a free, fair, transparent, and predictable environment for trade and commerce. And the countries should take real actions and erase unilateral trade retaliation and uncertainties in regional trade.
Regarding regional security, Kang urged all three nations to dedicate efforts to the total denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Wang said all involved should play constructive roles and facilitate dialogue on this issue. Kang said they will stick to the UN resolution and work closely to reach this goal. Kang vowed to strengthen cooperation between the three nations and to play a better role in the region and the world.
Over the past 20 years, the three countries have maintained their dialogue and cooperation. Since we are all neighbors, difficulties in bilateral relations are inevitable, but our cooperation should not stop. I believe our pledges to work more together will contribute to peace and prosperity both in the region and around the world.
Wang also discussed the situation in Hong Kong and the intervention from other countries in this incident. He said some protesters' extremely violent actions have already challenged the bottom line of the one country, two systems principle. Wang hopes other countries will take a fair and objective stance on this issue. The meeting was held in Gubei water town near the Great Wall. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China's Great Wall is a special cultural symbol in Oriental culture and history. He said that history inspires us and also teaches us important lessons. Wang urged that the three nations should be united as one and concentrate efforts on facing the challenges while staying dedicated to regional peace, stability, and prosperity. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
And staying with that story, negotiations on that trilateral free trade agreement between the three countries, that's China, Japan and South Korea, could help ease tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. Now, the trade talks may face obstacles due to tensions between Japan and South Korea, but China is still trying to take the lead in getting Tokyo and Seoul together for negotiations. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce said earlier that it's time for promoting market cooperation in the region. A ministry spokesperson said China hopes to accelerate the establishment of a free trade zone for the three countries. The last round of trilateral free trade talks was held in Japan in mid-April before trade disputes between Japan and South Korea escalated. Now, the Hong Kong-based Bank of East Asia has warned that weeks of sometimes violent protests in the city could weigh on its economy. The BEA said the tense atmosphere in Hong Kong was likely to hit inbound tourism if there was no resolution soon. Well, BEA's co-CEO, Adrienne Lee, also mentioned concerns for local businesses, including those in retail and catering.
Causeway Bay is a famous commercial district in Hong Kong and is seeing sluggish business. Some shops even have closed their doors, hoping to transfer their leases to others. Because the area is near the sites of protests, residents and tourists have shunned the area and has badly affected the businesses here.
Patrons became very few after June the 15th, and the sales volume dropped soon. It dropped 20% in June and slashed 35% in July.
Yang's restaurant has been open for less than a year. She invested 3 million Hong Kong dollars or 2.7 million yuan to cover all the expenses, including rent, renovation, and staff. But now she can't help but closing the restaurant. All the staff have become unemployed. The Hong Kong Catering Industry Association says that the losses of the total sector over the past 2 months have mounted to about 2 billion Hong Kong dollars.
We see no business on Saturdays and Sundays. The whole city is like a dead city. Residents don't want to be out on the streets. Many reservations were cancelled because of the inconvenience over the traffic jams brought by the protests.
Dining is not the only industry affected. Trade and logistics have also taken a heavy blow. A company doing cross-border online business says the protests that have paralyzed the airport and congested traffic have brought uncertainties to goods transportation.
Goods previously transferred from Hong Kong to the mainland are no more passing Hong Kong now. They are now directly transported to the mainland for the custom clearance.
The impacts will include increasing unemployment, less jobs, and finally, people's lives.
Political and trade personnel have called the situation an economic typhoon. Analysts say that 600,000 employees in the dining, retail, and hotel sectors could lose their jobs, making the restoration of social order vital. Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Well, let's shift focus now to the wonderful world of technology. And of course, the 2019 World Robotics Conference is currently underway, and they are mulling over cloud robotics that can access artificial intelligence in the cloud through a high-speed network. Of course, it's real, and it's among the latest technology that's on display at the conference in Beijing. Here's CGTN's Guan Xin with the latest.
A technician wearing a sensor-fitted glove is sending signals to a mechanical arm to put away plastic cups. This is just one example of how robotic capabilities have expanded far beyond assembly line and into trades that once deemed impossible. Another highlight in this year's robot conference, cloud robots. Robots that can access AI in the cloud via a high-speed network. Market watchers say the move could be the next step to revolutionizing the robotics sector.
The brain of most smart robots are chips, but a chip has very limited storage space and computing capability. In comparison, cloud computing is far more powerful in those areas. The in-depth learning feature of the cloud computing in particular can significantly improve the brain power of a robot.
A recent research report shows that the global robotics sector is expected to grow to $30 billion this year, and thus robots will be a major driver of the expansion, accounting for half of the market value. The report also says that China's robot market has been growing at an average rate of 21% since 2014, and the market size will reach $9 billion by the end of this year.
Robotics industry still faces many challenges going forward. They include overcoming hurdles in core technology and application. But overall, the sector is crucial in boosting the high-quality development of the Chinese economy.
Robots have revolutionized the manufacturing sector in recent decades, and they're starting to make their move into the wider world of business. When it comes to the robotics trends to watch this year, analysts predict that robots will become increasingly commonplace in our homes, and more of us will work alongside robots. Guanxin, CGTN.
Now, at the same time, a robotics revolution has captured the world's imagination over the past decade. Many sectors have purchased and installed these increasingly intelligent machines as their capabilities expand. While the global stock of industrial robots has more than doubled since 2010, economists are saying that approximately 1 in every 3 new manufacturing robots is being installed in China. And each newly installed robot is estimated to displace 1.6 manufacturing workers. They're also expecting that innovations in engineering and machine learning will lead to an accelerated adoption of robots in the service sector over the next 5 years. They say that as many as 20 million additional manufacturing jobs worldwide could be displaced due to robotization by 2030. Now, Apple has a new product rolling out this month, and it's not a device or software, it's a credit card. How exactly does it play into the Apple strategy? Well, CGTN's Mark New has the details.
Introducing a brand new service, and we call it Apple Card.
Apple has launched the new card for all its U.S. customers, partnering with MasterCard and Goldman Sachs to introduce the sleek titanium laser-etched Apple Card.
I think this will likely be the fastest growing credit card in history. I don't think any other credit card will match the speed of how quick this will likely grow.
Venture capitalist John Meyer says via Apple Wallet it took him less than 30 seconds to apply for a card.
Because Apple on your phone already has your personal information, the form's already filled out. All you really have to do is sign up, enter your Social Security, and from there you get presented with an offer that you can accept, and then you get a card in the mail.
Unlike almost all other major credit cards, Apple and Goldman Sachs say they will not share your personal information. The card also has no late fees, no annual fees, and encourages users to pay less interest. Via Skype, I asked Ted Rossman of creditcards.com how the companies will make money off this card.
I think that's an open question. I don't really think that this card is going to be a big moneymaker for Goldman or for Apple. I think both are playing the long game. For Goldman, it's their entree into consumer finance, consumer credit cards. For Apple, I think it's part of this longer-term view towards the payment ecosystem.
The Apple Card offers 1% cash back when you use the physical card, 2% cash back when using Apple Pay, and 3% when buying something from Apple. Rossman says while Apple is known for targeting affluent customers, this time it's going for a broader base.
I'm starting to think of this less as a card for the rewards chasers, because they can do better with other cards, but more of an option for people that are new to credit or rebuilding credit.
Recent earnings reports show Apple iPhone sales are falling, while its services revenues continue to rise. But venture capitalist Meyer says the two are intertwined, just like the Apple Card is with the iPhone.
They've designed this so that if you get rid of your iPhone, you literally can't even pay the bill. And so it's probably one of the strongest forces in the future to keeping people on iOS versus switching to Android.
So while it might look like Apple is creating a new revenue stream by getting into banking, the card may actually be a way to boost sales of its core product, the iPhone. Mark New, CGTN, Mountain View, California.
Well, shifting focus now, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. And Brent crude oil futures rose above $60 a barrel today. That's after industry data showed that a larger than expected drop in U.S. crude inventories had taken place. However, lingering worries about a possible global recession did cap those gains today. Meanwhile, gold prices easing today to hover about the $1,500 per ounce level. That, of course, is as investors turned cautious ahead of minutes expected from the U.S. Fed's last meeting, which, of course, is expected to shed more light on its plans to cut interest rates. Well, let's head into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. How pastoralists in northern Kenya are staying ahead of changing weather patterns.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, the e-commerce sector in South Africa is growing quite fast. In the Western Cape, for instance, online retail stores are proving so popular in the consumer electronics space that some startups want to expand well into the rest of the continent. Now, for a long time, online sales have contributed to a mere 1.4% or around $1 billion of total sales in South Africa. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with the details.
E-commerce in South Africa is gaining in momentum, with the industry now beginning to finally realize the fruits of its investment as more and more consumers begin to buy online. It's become far more simpler, easier and cost-effective, with some companies now providing price points on goods such as electronics that are simply hard to beat.
You've got to look at your pricing and you've got to make it accessible, especially for South Africans, because when you're buying overseas, you're paying crazy prices, you're paying your import duties, you're paying your VAT. I mean, if we can do it locally, it's just helping the next South African out.
Extreme Accessories is one of the largest suppliers of consumer electronics and accessories to the South African market, providing cost-effective alternatives to expensive gadgets like drones, gimbals and sports cameras. They've begun to create their own brands on the back of high export numbers, shipping their locally made Gannet and Gido mobile products to markets overseas.
You'll start to notice more online sites are opening up, more online sites are starting to offer delivery options. You know, that's where e-commerce is going to head, where everyone eventually has an online site where people can place orders and get deliveries done. So that's where it's going to scope towards.
While high shipping costs remain an obstacle to growing this sector even further, companies have chosen to focus on building their efficiencies from the purchase until the delivery. Of course, one of e-commerce's key drivers is the online experience, and that is what some of the startups have begun to focus on. New startup TraderBar is hoping to tap into global trade by emulating the successes of China's Alibaba by building a database from scratch, broadening the participation within the sector.
We are hoping that the work that we do in those different African markets is going to filter down and have ripple effects in the pipeline and enable those smaller companies to get on board, because the more companies export and the more countries export, the more they bring along the smaller potential exporters and business people into the value chain.
But one of the biggest contributors to the continued growth of the country's e-commerce sector is the change in mindset. Whether it's consumers or companies going online to make that next purchase, they all want the next sale to be as simple and efficient as possible. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And moving on now, nomadic livestock herders in East Africa's dry lands have endured climate variabilities for many years now. Now, without proper forecasting technology, the farmers have remained completely exposed to the vagaries of the weather and resultant heavy losses. Not anymore. Two telecoms engineers have developed an app that can be used with the simplest of phones. CGTN's Terry Wangari now reports from Kenya's northern Marsabit County.
For generations, residents in Marsabit, which is in the north of Kenya's arid region, would study the sky for any sign of rain. Whether it's some wind here or a wisp of a cloud there, these signs helped guide their livestock to water. But such divination is not reliable because of intensifying droughts. Those who relied on traditional methods were all caught flat-footed.
In this part of the country, we heavily rely on livestock for our livelihood. For instance, because of the previous drought, at this time there are no goats and many people are facing starvation. Because there's no livestock, there's not much trading, so people here are idle. This is also why there is an increase in inter-community violence. People are stealing each other's livestock, all because of the drought.
Thanks to technology, nomads in this part of the country can now receive detailed weather reports via text message to plan their migrations. The message service is called My Anga, which means atmosphere in Swahili. This is Maryland Market, where buyers and sellers exchange livestock. As you can see, the market is relatively empty. This is because the My Anga app has given pastoralists information that there are greener pastures in Samburu, which is east of Marsabit County.
Mayanga is a good service. As I speak now, my livestock are in a place where I'm sure there is pasture because of the information I got from the service. I just don't get messages about Laisamis area only. I also receive information on other areas like Karare and Isiolo. As of now, because of the service, I have sent my animals to Kipsing, which is near Isiolo. That's how helpful the message service has been for me.
Even those who hardly reads or hardly reads English or Kiswahili, they can get information in local dialect, local language, because it is actually translated into 4 different languages. That is Rendile, Samburu, Borana, and Gabra. It's easier. It has almost simplified everything for the pastoralist community within the Samis and in the larger Marsabit County.
The message service was developed by Amfratech, which began in 2013. The Kenyan firm was created to develop social solutions to societal problems using technology. It uses advanced weather data from U.S. agricultural intelligence firm AWARE to provide subscribers with rain and forage conditions for the week ahead in their locality.
Basically how it works is, as Amfratech, we get this 9x9 weather information from AWARE. Of course, using different capability or different channels. We use FTP to collect the data from the database. We use API, application programming interface, to now get the data. So what we do now is to do some aspect of value addition, to convert this data into a simple but actionable advisories.
A simple but life-changing resource for a community learning to adapt to increasing weather extremes. Amfratech has also rolled out a more advanced app-based version. They hope to eventually sign up tens of thousands of pastoralists. But rolling out their message service has come with its own challenges.
I think one of the challenges is basically the penetration, because it's a vast area, and this is, first of all, it's drought ravaged, okay? And therefore, the population, you don't really get, a dense population at a specific time.
My Anga is just one of the technologies that protect not just pastoralists, but a sector that contributes more than 12% to Kenya's GDP. The developers hope to roll out the application to the rest of northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia. Terry Wangari, CGTN, Marsabit, Kenya.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand firmer on the day after better than expected consumer inflation for July gave some support to the view that the South African Reserve Bank may cut interest rates further in 2019. Meanwhile, Kenya shilling strengthening against the dollar due to demand for the local currency, especially from some commercial banks who are looking to meet the central bank's reserve ratio requirements. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.